curiosity of the electorate that is in the room by answering their question, answering the questions that they ask, and not just telling us what you want us to know. Okay? So, Mr. Grossman, we'll start with you. Opening statement, 4 minutes.
If this were a normal election, and if these were normal times, I would tell you about my qualifications. I would tell you what I did and didn't do, and my opponent, Dr. Van Drew, would do the same. And you would judge who would be best qualified to do the job. You would judge who would serve the district in the best interest. But we know these are not normal times. We know there is more hatred, more division in this country today than at any time since the Civil War about 153 years ago. And as a history professor, adjunct, part-time, besides being a lawyer, in studying the history of those days, I can tell you beyond any doubt that the type of rhetoric, the type of hatred, the type of not looking at people of the other party as fellow Americans, but as opponents or enemies to be destroyed. Last time we had that kind of hatred in this country, we had a civil war that killed about 600,000 men on both sides. And if we don't watch out, that's what we're going to do to our country today. And ironically, the Civil War, of course, was caused by the treatment of African Americans in this country. One party thought that blacks were inferior and should be slaves. The other side thought that the Declaration of Independence that held that all of us are created equal and endowed with certain unalienable rights, that was the law of the land. Of course, the Republican Party of Abraham Lincoln felt that way. The South, that was the Democratic Party of that day. And after the Civil War was over and the Republicans in the North won, there was 50 years went by. And that 50 years has special meaning in Atlantic City because there's actually a memorial right by Albany Avenue. Not the circular monument, but there's a Civil War monument that was built by all of the citizens of Atlantic City 50 years after the Civil War. And if you look at the progress that was made in the black community from the end of the Civil War, 1865, to the time that monument was built in Atlantic City 50 years later, think of the enormous progress that was made. You had thriving neighborhoods. In fact, it was 1950, and that was when Sarah Spencer Washington opened up her beauty parlor on Arctic Avenue. And within 4 or 5 years became the first African-American woman multimillionaire in this country, right here in Atlantic City, with her Apex Cosmetics. And you know her story. When blacks were not admitted to hotels, she built her own hotel. Blacks couldn't have golf courses. She built the Apex Golf Course, which is still there in Pomona. And you look at Ralph Hunter did a whole museum at Mississippi Avenue and Baltic Avenue, showing the enormous progress, the thriving neighborhoods, the thriving businesses, the nightclubs, the hotels, just as every ethnic group had that opportunity. And that was the Atlantic City I grew up with. 50 years from slavery to the North Side, to Kentucky Avenue, the Harlem Renaissance, all those good things that were there. Were there problems? Sure there were problems. But one thing is, we Americans work together to fix those problems. Now look where we have been. In 1965, Lyndon Johnson, Democratic president, began what he called the Great Society. And at that point, we had 95% of the African-American community has been voting Democrat since then. Compare the 50 years from 1965 till now with the 50 years after the Civil War and ask yourself what is being gained by African-Americans voting 95% for Democrats. Where are all those businesses? Where are those homes? Where's the safety? As a child in Atlantic City, I walked in every neighborhood. I felt safe and comfortable, and any member of any community felt the same. You will now choose, not between me and Jeff Andrew, but which party. The Democrats pick up 23 seats. They will be running the country. Is that the future you want? Thank you. First of all, I was out involved in the campaign, so I have not heard all the details of the news You said there was an attempted assassination. Do we know who it was who sent those packages? Do we know if there were actually, if those packages, did any of them actually detonate?
I'm not sure that any of that matters, but you're using your 60 seconds, sir.
Okay. Let me start the time, because from what I know, we have to ask one question. What was the purpose of sending those packages? Was it to actually hurt somebody, or was it to influence the election? Was it to distract? I just asked a question. We have a saying called cui bono, who benefits? Did Republicans benefit from the sending of those packages, or did Democrats benefit from the sending of those packages? You look at the motive. I just had to ask the question.
Thank you, Mr. Grossman.
But they sure got the...
Excuse me. We're going to be very fair. This is run the same way every time. Time is to be respected. Because when I give you an extra minute, now he gets to get an extra minute. And it elongates our program. So please, out of respect for us, please acknowledge and stay within your time limits. Thank you. Mr. Manager, excuse me.
There was no assassination attempt.
Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, Mr. Grossman. First of all, let's make this clear. It's not about me, and it's not about you. It's about the NAACP program tonight. And you're going to respect that as well as the other gentlemen. Okay? Mr. Van Drew, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Grossman. We'll now move to the questions that have been provided by the audience, the electorate, persons that you intend to work for in the coming months. Mr. Grossman, I'm going to lend the first question to you. Do you believe in raising the minimum wage? And why?
Well, I believe that people should be paid based on what they produce. So if you have a high school kid with no experience, who has never held a job, doesn't know how to show up on time, doesn't know how to dress, in the job for the first time, is he worth $15 an hour? As one who has had a business, all I can tell you is, when I had my first job, I got a very small amount of money, and you know what? That's all I was worth. But after a few months, when I learned skills, and I learned discipline, and I got better, and I produced money for the employer. In other words, I believe people should be paid by how much they produce, and not how much they say they need. Because one thing about need, it's amazing how the more people get, the more they feel they need. And if we go back to that communist system where everybody gets paid but why they think they need, then we'll have a whole lot of people needing a whole lot and nobody wanting to produce, and we'll end up just like Venezuela and Nicaragua and all those failed communist countries. In fact, like all the countries that are bringing all these refugees and asylum seekers to our border. So I like to pay people based on what they produce.
Mr. Van Drew, 90-second rebuttal.
Years ago, and I guess some parts of
It's an issue that neither party has been able to solve. And this is directed to you, Mr. Van Drew. If you are privileged to serve this district, what sort of proposals do you have to fix our immigration system?
Are responsible for the immigration mess. The Democratic Party wants lots of immigrants who are poor, who depend on the government, so they'll vote Democrat forever. And of course you have the Republicans getting their big donors from the big fat corporations that want to have not only cheap labor, but compliant labor, labor that will not complain when things are wrong because they're afraid of being deported. And we see that on the boardwalk. Why are so many young people in Atlantic City hanging around while we're bringing thousands of kids from other countries during the summer to work on the boardwalk, to do the jobs I used to do when I was a student? And by the way, when I was a student, I didn't need a student loan because, remember, a summer on the boardwalk used to pay for a year of college? When did that change? But what I would do to fix the situation that neither Republicans or Democrats want to fix, first we've got to stop immigration till we can fix our problem now. We build the wall, we send anyone who goes over the wall back immediately. Number two, we should suspend the numbers or greatly reduce the numbers. And then number three, when we're not taking new people, we should take the people who are here, who are qualified, who have learned English, acquired skills, respect our law. They should stay to become good Americans. But the people in the gangs, the drugs, the people who think they're entitled to something for nothing, we can say, thank you very much, we hope you enjoyed your stay, but now you gotta go. And then once we fix the problem, then we could go back to a normal America like we had when America was great.
Thank you.
That was reshaped by the Supreme Court, and we know that we've just gone through a very theatrical experience confirming Justice Kavanaugh. Here's another question that relates to the Supreme Court in some way. There are many, possibly some in this room, particularly the one who asked the question, thinks that affirmative action is on the chopping block. It's being threatened as a result of the makeup of the Supreme Court. Can you talk to us about your opinion of affirmative action and what you would do to support or to limit affirmative action? We'll start with you, Mr. Gross.
I believe in our Declaration of Independence that we're all we hold these truths to be self-evident. We're all created equal, endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That governments are instituted to secure these rights. That's how this country was founded. When Abraham Lincoln led us into the Civil War, he wanted to make sure that Declaration of Independence applied to people of all races and ethnic groups, and that should be the foundation of America. So your only qualification to get a job, a promotion, a scholarship, or anything should be based on your qualification. When you see the absurd results, I remember going to a concert at an orchestra, and the string section was terrible. Later I found out that because there were so many Asian applicants, and they actually had a rule that the orchestra could not get their funding unless they had, quote, diversity in the string section. You don't pick football players or baseball players by diversity. You know, how many Jewish guys are on the starting team of the Eagles? I don't know. But is that the way to get winning teams? No. You want to pick the best, talented, most qualified people. That's how you have winning teams. And when a whole country only looks at talent, hard work, and character and achievement, you have a winning country. And that should be the basis of America. It always was. It worked for every other ethnic group. And when African Americans embraced that until about the mid-1960s, that's when you had the thriving Arctic Avenue and Baltic Avenue and the West Side and Kentucky Avenue.
Diversity is a good thing. It is a goal.
Been impaired, particularly the Voting Rights Act of '65 has been impaired, and voter suppression is seemingly the law of the land. Can you talk about whether or not you agree with the change to the Voting Rights Act as a result of the decision in Shelby versus Holder, and how you would plan to address the limited participation in the political process since that time?
One of the greatest gifts that God has given us is the ability to vote. And it is...
Over the years, I've had the privilege and misfortune of winning an election by 1 vote and losing an election by 3 votes. So I know very well how the system works. And in my opinion, for more than 50 years, at least as long as I've been in politics, the system works perfectly. We say we want every vote to count, but we want every honest vote to count. And as a candidate, I understand the frustration of what it's like to go canvassing door to door, to meet each voter with a voter list, and then to knock on houses and see boarded up houses where no one has lived there for years, and then on election day suddenly see 11 or 12 or 15 people show up at the polls to vote who claim they lived at the house that I had been at before. So I think we do need rules that make sure that we know who each voter is, so we can make sure each voter is a legal citizen, so we can make sure that each voter is registered to vote out of the house they say they're voting. Because what's the point of having an election if only one side can reach the voter to talk to them? If I'm knocking on a door at 31 North Kelsey Avenue and nobody's there because that voter is living somebody else, how do I as a candidate have a fair chance to express my views? So I think it's very important that we have every voter have the chance to vote, but we need rules, such as you must register 3 weeks or 4 weeks ahead of time, put your address. But if you just say anybody could show up at the polling place at any time, think of the opportunity for fraud. And God knows in Atlantic City, we have seen plenty of evidence of fraud from time to time, and we've got to keep elections honest.
Well, we just talked about the large amount of homeless vets in our area, and knowing the strong support that Congressman Lobiando had for the veteran communities. What is your mandate for vets in this area?
Well, one of the most important things that President Trump brought about after so many people, including Frank Lobiando, talking for years, is that now either it's already in place or it will soon be in place, that if a veteran gets sick, he does not have to go to a veterans hospital in Philadelphia or Wilmington to be treated. And anyone who knows the history of how that started, it started after World War I when you had these horrible battlefield injuries caused by poison gas and shells, where the veterans, the injured veterans, had to be treated by military doctors familiar with those kinds of injuries. But now that veterans are going in just mostly because they're older now for most veterans, there's no reason to make them go to a specific veterans hospital. They could be treated by any doctor or clinic around, and I'm so glad that President Trump finally brought that about. As far as homeless veterans, one thing I learned, the difference between Republicans and Democrats. Democrats like to put everybody into boxes, into groups, all veterans. Republicans look at each individual. We have some veterans who adjust very well when they get out of the service, and they don't need special help. But then we have people who have either from shell shock or post-traumatic syndrome, they have problems. We have to deal with each individual veteran based on that need. And what I found out from my personal experience is most people who I know who are homeless, they're not homeless because they can't afford a home. They're homeless because they have a psychological condition that keeps them from adjusting to a normal life, and we have to treat each individual based on their own individual issues and problems.
Receive money from the NRA, and statistics bear out that the majority of America do not agree with some of the policies that the NRA pushes for. Can you talk to us in a time where, in a year where 272 mass shootings have already taken place? What is your plan? What is your proposal for common sense gun legislation?
Common sense.
I agree that the Second Amendment is there for a reason, that each citizen, as our Declaration of Independence says, has certain unalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And your life is the most important of those rights, and you have a God-given right to protect yourself. Those tragic mass shootings, they all took place in gun-free zones. The tragic, almost daily killings in Chicago take place where you have some of the toughest gun control laws in the country. So there's something more than that. And as Dr. Van Drew pointed out, in Florida, all you had to do was enforce existing laws to have prevented that tragedy. So I believe that the right, for example, certain rights that are We don't have in New Jersey. In Congress, I would like to provide for reciprocity so we get that. One is the right for me to carry a concealed weapon. Right now, I have to keep it at home. And as a lawyer who has represented some landlords dealing with violent tenants, women dealing with violent husbands and boyfriends, I've been subject to threats, and I would feel more comfortable if I could protect myself. The statistics seem to show that where you have that concealed carry, there's less gun crime, and many crimes are prevented because the criminal has no idea who is carrying. We also need what's called reciprocity. We had that tragic situation with Shaneen Allen, comes from Philadelphia to Atlantic City to visit relatives. She has a minor traffic offense, and she was complying with the laws of Pennsylvania. She had the weapon secure in her glove compartment, and when she was stopped, she truthfully told the officer under Pennsylvania law she had the weapon there. She was facing 3.5-year prison sentence because of that violation. We have to have reciprocity to prevent that.
Mr. Grossman, I have a question here that says, if you represent us in our as our congressional representative, you must answer this question: is there, I'm going to add, systemic racism present in our world? And do you agree with the FBI that racist extremists have infiltrated law enforcement?
I have seen no evidence of that. When you say systemic racism, I do not know of any person of any color with skills, with discipline, with drive, with achievement, who has been denied any position or any promotion because of his or her race. I don't know about it. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. And people are people everywhere. People have a grudge. Sometimes people are mad at ex-girlfriends, ex-boyfriends. Sometimes people give relatives preferences. That's human nature. And no matter how many laws you have, people are going to be people. And there will never be perfect justice in the world. But all I could say, if this were the evil, racist country with so much hatred against minorities, what you would expect if you would expect to see oppressed and persecuted minorities fleeing the United States in droves, looking for better opportunities in other countries. But that's not what's happening, is it? We have people of all races, colors, and religions risking their lives to go on boats and rafts and inner tubes to come to this country. So if things were so bad, I think it would be the other way around. So to me, if you are poor, if you're down and out, just talk to your parents and grandparents, and they will tell you of how people in America could always overcome whatever racism or discrimination. My grandparents faced it as Jews, and how did they overcome it? They did twice the work for half the money until they were accepted, and then their children had the better life than they have. That's the American way.
Mr. Andrew?
This country is a good country.
Civil rights. What are your intentions in supporting and expanding civil rights in this country?
Well, I think first...
One of the first things I learned in political science when I went to school at Duke University was that organizations, the leaders of organizations, don't always represent the ordinary members they claim to represent. For example, you have so many unions who collect dues from their members, and yet they support open borders that drive down the wages and job opportunities for their own members. You have the Sierra Club, which claims to want to protect the environment, and yet supports massive uncontrolled immigration, even though it's destroying the open space they say they want to protect. And unfortunately, the NAACP, in many chapters, have adopted agendas that maybe benefit a handful of the members who have the government jobs, who benefit from certain programs, but are not really speaking for what's best for the general African American population, particularly when I saw that the mainland branch of the NAACP wants open borders. doesn't want limits on immigration, even though since 1965, when the Democratic Party quadrupled the number of legal immigrants and stopped enforcing the border completely, the biggest devastation for crime, lack of social services, lack of jobs, lack of opportunities, lack of better pay has been caused by this massive, uncontrolled, and legal and illegal immigration. Yet the NAACP wants more of it. So maybe an F may have been bad for the leaders of the NAACP, but I think Frank Lobiondo got an A in every aspect of protecting this district. So we have to look at the difference between the leaders and the rank and file members.
Mr. Grossman, this question is for you. Currently on the docket in the House of Representatives is the Farm Bill, which expired a month or so ago. And the Farm Bill is, as you know, authorizes and reauthorizes food stamps, what is now called SNAP. And the Farm Bill that the House put forward proposes to take food from about 5 million of the 41 million families that depend on SNAP. Can you talk to us about your intentions on protecting safety net programs like SNAP, like Medicaid, like Medicare, and would you ever vote for a bill that would threaten someone's housing, someone's food access, someone's health care?
Well, first of all, I think we all agree that this massive, uncontrolled immigration, if we enforced our immigration law, just think of how much extra money would be available that we're not spending on the hospitals, the prisons, the interpreters, the police, the social welfare program. And second, how many times have you, those of you who are working, been in the supermarket and you see people ahead of you paying for all these luxury pre-packed food items that you wish you could have but can't afford? And then when you get to the parking lot, you see the person who paid for those items that you can't afford, and you're working and you're tired, and you see them getting into a better car than you have. And then you get home and find out that they're living in a better house than you have because you're working and you're taking care of your family. So when you say what's good for Americans, remember, every person who gets something for nothing, somebody else is working twice as hard to pay for it. And also, when you take away the incentive to work, when you have more people are sitting in a wagon and hardly anyone's pulling the wagon, then finally people say, why should I bother pulling the wagon? Why don't I just sit and collect my benefits? One thing, I just found out a true story. One of the volunteers at our campaign headquarters told me that when Donald Trump's kid wanted a car, Donald Trump made Donnie Jr. work 2 years as a dockhand before he would get the money for the car. So we've got to find out who really needs, and we got to find out who just doesn't want to work. We have to sort things out in this country.
Sure.
So as a young man
That Trump narrowly won, but you're now in a city that Trump did not win, in a county that Trump did not win, and Trump also lost the popular vote by almost 3 million votes. I would say that that's enough to say that there are enough Americans and enough persons in this county who think there should be a check on the president's power. As a congressman, how do you plan to serve as a check to the executive branch?
Well, the diversity of this district is something.
This morning I had fun. I did an interview on the Joe Piscopo show where he was at Ocean Resort. And so I was so happy to be walking around and I saw about 24 people who I knew from Atlantic City working. And they were happy. They liked their jobs. They're making good money. The buildings were being fixed up. It was good to see the Hard Rock open. So ask yourself, is Atlantic City better off now after 1.5 years or almost 2 years of Trump? Or was it better off with all the casinos closing during the Obama days? I want to keep the full employment, the good job, the high wages, that Trump has brought with his fair trade deals, his tax cuts, and ending Obama's war against American business and industry. I want to enforce immigration laws. I don't want to be a check on Trump. Donald Trump has been trying to make us safe by enforcing the border, by enforcing immigration laws. And the courts have been misused. Congress has used every gimmick to block him, resist, obstruct, impeach. I want to be the offensive line to help President Trump move his agenda forward so that we can again have the full employment, to be safe in this country again, not worried about you go into a mall and somebody's going to shoot up the place. You walk down the street, someone in a truck is going to think they're going to go to paradise by running you and everybody in the street over. We've got to keep America safe, working, and we've got to protect the Second Amendment. We've got to have health insurance that you can afford. Remember, you like your doctor, you keep your doctor. Every doctor I had, I lost after years. So I want to help Trump, and I don't think he's abusing his power.
Just before our candidates give their closing remarks, you can take this time now to prepare your remarks. I'm going to ask that Mr. Goodman will come and make a special announcement.
First of all, let me thank the audience for maybe lack of participation. But let me tell you, on a serious note, this is the reason why we have this, so that you can be informed personally, so you can be heard from them, right from their mouth. As much as we might not agree with either candidate, we can agree to this. This is America, and they have the right to speak up. Okay? And we're fought hard for everybody to have the right to speak up. Now, here's the dilemma that is presented to us as the NAACP. We have other candidates. They're here. They're independent. We have other candidates for freeholder. They're here. Okay? Because we have time, and we only paid for a certain amount of time to be in this building, we have a situation where I'm going to tell you the candidates, and they can present themselves outside. Okay? Yes. Excuse me, I'm sorry. This is the decorum. Sir.
This is a dishonest venue.
Okay. I agree with you. I agree with you. I have no problem. I agree with you. But unfortunately, we have... Okay. Thank you, sir. And he has his right to speak up. That's all right. And we have our right to remove him from this audience. That's all right. Okay? And unfortunately, that's Dr. Stephen Fenichel. We didn't have the time to put 3 other candidates on, unfortunately. Also, for freeholder, that's coming up, we have 2 other candidates, Maureen Lighty and Maureen Kern. They here as representatives. They will represent the 6th Ward of Atlantic City, Ventnor, Margate, and Longport. In lieu of time to give those representatives of the freeholder that will represent all of Atlantic City, all of Pleasantville, we're going to just let Mr. Frank Formica, and Celeste Hernandez be the candidates up here to debate one another. Again, I recognize the unfairness. Unfortunately, for time purposes, that's how we have to roll. So now we're going to get the closing. We're going to do an in-between and bring the freeholders up. And I deeply apologize. And trust me, it is a dilemma. And thank you for your time. Hold on. The final closing. Reverend Francois.
Mr. Grossman, your closing remarks.
As I pointed out, there's a lot more at stake than who represents this South Jersey district. If there are 23 more Democrats in Congress win the election, then Democrats will have control of Congress. They have already pledged that if they do that, they will resist, obstruct, and impeach President Trump. We have Dr. Van Drew said he's independent. He said he's not going to vote for Nancy Pelosi. I've heard him say as Speaker of the House. But think about this. Suppose this happens, and it's very possible. Suppose there are 117 Republicans and 117 Democrats. And who will Jeff Andrew caucus with? He's going to caucus with the Democrats. And if the Democrats have even a 1-vote majority, and the majority of the other Democrats pick Nancy Pelosi to pick the speaker, will Dr. Van Drew go with his party and go with Nancy Pelosi, or will he break with his party and pick, say, Kevin McCarthy of the Republican? I think I'd like to hear what he would do, because I suspect in the end he will go with his party. And if that happens, as far as I'm concerned, President Trump's full employment agenda is gone. The tax cuts are gone. The fair trade deals are gone. The full employment is gone. The borders are open. The war on terror sort of fizzles out because we don't want to offend anybody's feelings. And we will have an America that is poor, broke, divided, and violent. And that's what's going to happen. And that's what's at stake in this election. And think about the Atlantic City you had before. The Atlantic City with a booming Kentucky Avenue, Arctic Avenue, so many entrepreneurs that you fill that Ralph Hunter's museum there. Was that really such an evil, rotten, racist, oppressive time? I don't think so. But that's the choice you have to make. They say, be careful what you wish for. Is it really good for any group to vote 95% for one particular party? Because once you do that, it means, well, he may not be good, he may be hiring all his relatives, but we all have to stick together. That's not the American way. The American way is each individual is judged as an individual, and I like to help make America great again. Thank you.
Let me start by saying one thing. Is going to be independent, who isn't just going to follow along and do what they're told by any particular party, whether it's Republican or Democrat, but is going to represent the individual human beings who are in their district, the individual human beings that have a myriad of different problems and situations in their lives. Now, are you going to have somebody that's going to do that? Somebody who's going to be around, somebody that's not going to just be an ideologue, that's just going to represent one point of view regardless of how it affects everybody else? Or are you going to have somebody that's going to listen and work with you and try to make a difference with you and fight with you?
We will choose you, Jeff.
Let's thank both of our candidates for their candor and for their serious listening.
Thank you once again. That's all our purpose for being here. Next we're going to have the candidates for freeholder. I'm going to ask Mr. Hernandez and Mr.